My name is Therese Jones. I'm one of the reference librarians at the Wyckoff Library, and I would like to read the foreword from The Right Stuff, one of my favorite books. If you're like me, you watched the movie first and then read the book. I did things kind of opposite, but it's a wonderful book which I'd like to share with you this evening. Foreword. This book grew out of some ordinary curiosity. What is it, I wonder, that makes a man willing to sit up on top of an enormous Roman candle, such as a Redstone, Atlas, Titan, or Saturn rocket, and wait for someone to light the fuse? I decided on the simplest approach possible. I would ask a few astronauts and find out. So I asked a few in December of 1972 when they gathered at Cape Canaveral to watch the last mission to the moon, Apollo 17. I discovered quickly enough that none of them, no matter how talkative otherwise, was about to answer the question, or even linger for more than a few seconds on the subject at the heart of it, which is to say, courage. But I did sense that the answer was not to be found in any set of traits specific to the task of flying into space. The great majority of the astronauts who had flown the rockets had come from the ranks of test pilots. All but a few had been military test pilots, and even those few, such as Neil Armstrong, had been trained in the military. And it was this that led me to a rich and fabulous terrain that, in a literary sense, had remained as dark as the far side of the moon for more than half a century: military flying and the modern American officer corps. Immediately following the First World War, a certain fashion set in amongst writers in Europe and soon spread to their obedient colonial counterparts in the United States. War was looked upon as inherently monstrous, and those who waged it, namely military officers, were looked upon as brutes and Philistines. The tone was set by some brilliant novels, among them All Quiet on the Western Front, The Journey to the End of the Night, and The Good Soldier Schwenk. The only proper protagonist for a tale of war was an enlisted man, and he was to be presented not as a hero, but as every man, as much a victim of war as any civilian. Any officer above the rank of second lieutenant was presented as a martinet or a fool, if not an outright villain, no matter who he fought for. The old-fashioned tale of prowess and heroism was relegated to second and third-rate forms of literature, ghost-written autobiographies, and stories in pulp magazines on the order of Argosy and Blue Book. Even as late as the 1930s, the favorite war stories in the pulps concerned World War I pilots. One of the few scientific treatises ever written on the subject of bravery is The Anatomy of Courage by Charles Moran, who served as a doctor in the trenches for the British in World War I, and who was better known later as Lord Moran, personal physician to Winston Churchill. Writing in the 1920s, Moran predicted that in the wars of the future, adventurous young men who saw glory in war would tend to seek it as pilots. In the 20th century, he said, they would regard the military pilot as the quintessence of manly daring that the cavalryman had been in the 19th. Serious treatment of the drama and psychology of this new pursuit, flying high-performance aircraft in battle, was left to the occasional pilot who could write, the most notable of them being Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. The literary world remained oblivious. Nevertheless, young men did exactly what Moran predicted. They became military officers so that they could fly, and they flew against astonishingly deadly odds. As late as 1970, I was to discover in an article by a military doctor in a medical journey, a career Navy pilot faced a 23% likelihood of dying in an accident. This did not even include deaths in combat, which at the time, with the war in Vietnam in progress, were catastrophically high for Navy pilots. The Right Stuff became the story of why men were delighted to take on such odds in this, an era literacy people had long since characterized as the age of the anti-hero. Such was the psychological mystery that animated me in the writing of this book. And if there were readers who were not interested in the exploration of space per se, but who were interested in the right stuff, nonetheless, perhaps it might have been because the mystery caught their imagination as well as mine. Since this book was first published in 1979, I have enjoyed corresponding with many pilots and with many widows of pilots. Not all have written to pat me on the back, but almost all seemed grateful that someone had tried, and it had to be an outsider, to put into words certain matters that the very code of pilot rules off limit in conversation. These matters add up to one of the most extraordinary and most secret dramas of the 20th century. T.W., August 1983.